Hello, folks. Dustin Zarni here, Democratic Elections Commissioner in Onondaga County, and welcome back to Commissioner in a Car. In my own car. I'm finally in my own car again. So thank you so much for being patient with me these last few weeks. It's been quite a nightmare. But I'm back, and I'm back doing Commissioner in a Car on Tuesdays. I'm going to be doing them on Tuesdays from now on, because Tuesdays is a seminal day in elections, and it's a seminal day in the election calendar, and I think I will remember to put this aside for me to do Commissioner in a Car. I had a lot of great run of doing Commissioner in a Car on Tuesdays, and I'm going to get back to that, and that means the weekly wonks will be on Sundays from now on. I also had a great run of that for a couple of years, too. And so I'm going to go back to that schedule. Commissioner in a Car on Tuesdays, weekly wonks on Sundays. But today's Commissioner in a Car, today's Tuesday, May 26th. And this is the independent filing petitions version of Commissioner in a Car, episode of Commissioner in a Car. And why? Well, that's because today's the last filing day for independent nominating petitions, and it's one of the last steps in our weave that we have of building the ballot in New York. Well, days until primary day, we are 28 days away from the June primary, less than a month. And days until the November midterm election, 161 days. So really, time is going down real fast here. So to get into the independent nominating petitions, yes, today was the filing deadline all over New York State for independent nominating petitions. Now, what are independent nominating petitions? And I'm going to put independent in quote because I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. For independent nominating petitions are a way to get on the ballot if you do not want to get on the ballot or you want to get on the ballot in addition to your four recognized parties. We have four recognized parties in New York: Democrat, Republican, Conservative, and Working Families. They get on the ballot mostly through designating petitions that happened back in April, or caucuses for some town and village candidates that will happen through July and are happening now and happening at different times. That's how major party candidates or recognized party candidates get on the ballot in New York. So if, let's say you're not a member of the major party, you're not a member of the Democrat, Working Families, Republican, Conservative Party, or maybe you are registered in that party, but you want to run on this additional line, you have to do what's called independent nominating petitions. Now, independent nominating petitions are where the reason it's called independent, it's meant for people who are not running on these other lines, and they choose their own party name. Now, in the past, we have seen libertarians and Green Party candidates who aren't recognized parties in New York because they haven't got enough signatures or to get on the statewide ballot or enough votes to stay on the statewide ballot. That sometimes you see them doing the independent nominating, but most of the time, independent nominating are people that make up their own name. Probably the most famous one of that was the Rent's Too Damn High. Remember that guy? Rent's Too Damn High Party. He ran for governor many years ago, got enough signatures, was on the ballot under that name. So you do have that. Most of the time, people have their own name that they're running under. And we saw today that in Onondaga County, well, before I go into that, so who can, that's, if you want to run for an office that you're not on those lines, you have this filing period that started in April 15th or something like that, and then ran until May 26th. So who can sign these petitions? Well, unlike designating petitions, which need to be signed by the party you're running in, these can be signed by any voter in the political subdivision that you're running in. But they cannot have signed a designating petition. So if they sign for a candidate for that petition, then they can't sign this petition. You can only sign to support a candidate to get on the ballot. You can vote however you want, but to support a candidate to get on the ballot, you can only sign once during this whole year in that political subdivision. You can sign multiple petitions for different offices, but for that particular office, you can only sign once. So those who can sign. And the signature requirements are a little different, and they're usually higher. So the signature requirements for designating petitions are 5% of the enrolled voters inside that party. But designating petitions or independent petitions are actually 5% of the voters who voted for governor in the last governor's election inside that political subdivision. So usually that's way more, because there's way more people who vote for governor than are enrolled in a particular party. And but every now and then there are exceptions. OCL 16, the County Life 16 in our area, has a smaller than their designating petition period, because they are, it's kind of the inner city of Syracuse, and they have low voter turnout, even though they have high voter enrollment. So, especially in the Democratic Party. So they tend to have lower signature counts for independent signatures. Same with sheriff, because the law breaks us at 1,500 for independent petitions, whereas you need 2,000 for Democrats to run countywide. So there's weird quirks in the law, but most of the time you need almost double the amount of designating petitions that you need to get on the Democratic line. You need double that. So why do people do it? Well, again, if you're a voter that's not enrolled in a political party and this is your only chance to get on the ballot. That being said, that is not what happens most of the time. So in Onondaga County, we had 26 petitions turned in. Most of them today, although a few petitions were turned in late last week. That represented 38 candidates. Now, in villages, they tend not to run on major party lines. But even in some of these villages, like the village of Baldwinsville, they do run on Democratic Party lines. And yet, even though they're on the Democratic Party line, they're also running on a different independent line. That's because of fusion voting. In New York, which I like to call confusion voting, in New York, we have this weird system. And it is weird, by the way. We're only 2 states that do this, where your name can appear on the ballot multiple times, and your votes are fused together to get your win total. So, for example, John Mannion, he is our congressman. He runs on the Democrat and Working Families line. Ryan McMahon, our county executive, he runs on the Republican and Conservative line. But sometimes they don't get cross-endorsed by a third party. Toby Shelley, for example, this year decided not to get endorsed by the Working Families line, which normally endorses Democrats, and wanted to do this independent line himself, and he did. And so he will appear on the ballot twice if his petitions hold up under the Democratic line and a line that he calls We the People. And a lot of Democrats did We the People as their independent line. We also saw a lot of people who do it. Now, what happens if you do an independent line and you already have 2 lines? Well, then it gets rolled up in New York. You can only appear twice on the ballot unless you are cross-endorsed by multiple recognized parties. So, like, if somebody got cross-endorsed by all 4 of the recognized party, they would appear all 4 times on the ballot. However, if they appear twice, and most candidates do, most candidates are cross-endorsed by the Democrat and Working Families Party in New York, or the Republican and Conservative Party in New York. However, there are some that only appear once. Only Democrat, only Republican, whatever. And they rock these independent lines to give themselves a second line because they feel that they need another line on the ballot that if they're a Democrat, that their Republican friends will vote for them on that. But again, only one of our petitions that were turned in at the Onondaga County Board of Elections were for a legitimate third-party candidate, where they're not going to appear on the Democrat or Republican or Working Families or Conservative line. And even that person, it's Morgan Babette, Morgan, not endorsement, by the way, I'm just talking about facts. She's running for County Ledge 16. She wanted to run in the Democratic primary, but was kicked off the ballot. And so this is her way to get back on the ballot. The difference here is independent petitions do not appear on the primary ballot. They appear on the general election ballot. So, if two people, run in the Democratic Party, then we have a primary. Independent petitions, it doesn't matter how many people put in independent petitions. They're not running against each other till we get to the general election. So we do have that fear sometimes that somebody's on an independent petition and splitting the vote and creating a three-way race. But again, there's only one race in Onondaga County where somebody put in their petition and that there's a possibility of a three-way race. And even that race, actually, I take that back. OCL 16 doesn't even have that possibility because it's the one race that the Republicans haven't put in a candidate. So while there may be a general election ballot, and again, all of this is subject to objections, as we saw during the designation process, this doesn't necessarily mean these are true independent candidates. Now, I did see that, I heard, I haven't seen the filing yet. I heard, but I saw on Instagram Will Staten, who is running an independent line for Congress, may have filed. Now, I wouldn't know that because I'm not the New York State Board of Elections. I'm the Onondaga County Board of Elections. So statewide offices like comptroller, governor, and attorney general, as well as congressional offices because they cross county party lines, or in Onondaga County are two Senate districts, Senate District 50, Senate District 48, and the Assembly Districts 127 and 126 that go into other counties. They all file up at the state board. And as of Friday, nobody had filed really statewide. But today being the last day and after a holiday, this is usually when people file. So sometime tonight we'll find out from the state board who's filed. And then, of course, they have to go through the objection process. Independent petitions are just like designating petitions where there is an objection process. Something gets filed, you got 3 days to file a general, 6 days after that to file a specific, 14 days after the last day to file petitions, you can file a court. So all of that is still in play for independents. So even though we've had these 26 petitions with 38 candidates, some of them may not survive. We're going to have to find out. So now there is an interesting wrinkle, because I think a lot of people worry about splitting up votes, especially when it comes to primary candidates also doing independent lines. I will say we didn't have any of this actually in Onondaga County, but if a primary candidate is on the Democratic primary and they file an independent petition, they could survive for another crack at the race in the general election. But of course, if there's a Democrat and a Republican on there, it looks like a split vote. But a few years back, the county legislature or the state legislature passed a rule that allows candidates to get off the ballot for independent petitions if they lose a primary. And they have 7 days after the primary to make that decision. So just because they filed a petition doesn't mean they're going to be on the general election ballot. If they're in a primary, they could lose that primary. So we'll see if any of the statewide have that, especially the comptroller race, which is in a primary. We'll see if anybody did that. Probably not. And why would they bother with that when this Democratic primary is going on? They should be focusing on that. So that is independent petitioning in a nutshell. So you remember earlier I talked about the weave. I talk about this a lot, how we're weaving the ballot together in New York all year long. Different things are happening that give us information to put on the ballot for the general election in November. And the first thing was the offices to be filled. That happens in February, where the clerks give us what offices are going to be on the ballot. We kind of know, but this is the official certification. Then in March and April, the designating petitions for most offices, most towns, most parties, all county offices, all city offices, they have to do designating petitions. Well, that happened in April. Then comes the independent nominating petitions, which is happening right now, right? They just filed those. Now we have three more things that will get us to our final ballot. There are some towns who caucus instead of petition. Only a couple of Republican towns, about half of the Democratic towns, they meet by caucus, which takes the place of their primary. They're in they can happen anytime, with notice, of course, given at the town hall and at the Board of Elections. Those happen throughout the period and will be done by the middle of July. Then on August 3rd is another important date. On August 3rd is the last date for somebody to resign that is running for office or is not running for office, so it's not already on the ballot, that could create another position on the ballot. We saw that happen in Manlius earlier this year. We're seeing it happen in Lysander and in Geddes, Lysander for a town councilor and Geddes for highway superintendent. These are people that are resigning that weren't on the ballot this year that are now going on the ballot. And then there's August 3rd is also the date for propositions to be put on the ballot. You may have heard in the news, and I'll talk more about this later, if they get on the ballot. But you saw in the news that there are Democrats that are on the county legislature are putting forward county executive term limits, an alteration to the charter on redistricting, and an alteration to the charter on how county legislators are replaced on the ballot. These propositions go before the voters, and the voters have to vote on it because the legislative bodies don't have the authority to change these things by themselves. Usually they're charter changes. We saw that in the Syracuse City Charter with redistricting a few years ago. They were trying to set up a similar product for Onondaga County redistricting. So the June legislative session, there will be some votes. Then the county exec can decide whether he's vetoing these, and then there can be a override vote in July. We'll see where these all go, right? So they may not make the ballot. So I'm going to be doing a thing on propositions later on. And then the last thing that informs our ballot are the Supreme Court conventions. Those Supreme Court conventions for Democrat, Republican, working families, conservative. We have one Supreme Court seat up this year. Remember, Supreme Court is the entry-level court in New York. You go, instead of being the top level, it's Supreme Court, then the appellate division, and then the Court of Appeals is the top level court. So you have to get to be on those other appellate division and Court of Appeals. You have to be a Supreme Court justice. So you have to get elected as a Supreme Court justice first before that happens. I think there could be workarounds, but that's the entry level position. And we have one seat up this year. I believe it's an open seat because somebody was aged out in New York. If you're 70 years of age, you have to retire as a judge. And so that'll be an interesting seat because Democrats won 3 of 4 of those Supreme Courts last session. And in a even better Democratic year, that could be a seat, but it's a one-on-one, so you never know what's going to happen there. So those are the last 3 or 4 things that need to happen to make that weave happen, that New York's ballot will take place. So That's why we work full time. That's why we're here every day. That's why, a lot of that's going on. So that, independent nominating petitions are done. I guess technically some petitions could come in by the mail, because even though today's the last filing day, it's a filing day. So it could be filed by postmark. And if it's received by the 28th, then it's a valid petition. So, and again, we're going to have objections and all. So we got a little time until we see what's going on. And of course, with my commissioner in cars, I'll be informing you of everything that's happening along the way. So weekly walks are on Sundays now. The last 2 Sundays I got them up. I got Assembly District 126 and Assembly District 127. This week, I'll be doing Assembly District 128. That is the Pam Hunter district that goes around in the towns of Onondaga, DeWitt, and Salina, as well as a fair portion of the east side and inner city of Syracuse. And so what I'm excited about is that I'm getting back to the districts that are all inside Onondaga County, so I can use my data. As much as I love the state board, I can run accurate data of what's happening today in these districts, including the age of voters. Remember, I used to do the age of voters. Well, I had to stop that as I did Congress and Senate and the 2 assembly districts outside, because I didn't have good data on that. Now I do. So I'm absolutely excited to get back into that. That'll be this weekend. And then next week on Commissioner in the Car, we'll be talking about early voting sites. Now, we've already announced the early voting sites. We had to do that on May 1st, but there's some changes coming. And I'll go into all of that next week. But, we may be adding 2 more sites for early voting than we have for the primary, but we'll also talk about the general. So all of that will be next week. I may have said last week that I was going to do that, but we were going through a pre-clearance process with the Attorney General. It took some time to get through. And so now we're going to announce something this week that will that will rise our sites from 6 to 8 for the primary. So hold on, check it out. We'll be by next week, I will have this firmed and done. We had a decision made today, and I'm not going to go into it too much, but next week I will. All right. So that's it. Thank you very much for coming to my commissioner back in my own car. And I'll see you on Tuesdays with Commissioner in the Car, Sundays with weekly walk. Hopefully I will keep my promises on these 2 things and get this done. Thank you again. It's an honor to be here. Bye-bye.